Okay, it looks like we've got most of the participants in. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Spinning Out a Cancer Immunotherapy Company, the story of PairX. I'm Chris Lang. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Duke-NUS Medical School. Maybe quickly, for those of you who don't know us, Duke-NUS is Singapore's first and still only research-intensive graduate medical school. We're a collaboration with Duke University in North Carolina, and we are an autonomous school of the National University of Singapore. Our Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, through our Centre for Technology and Development, commercializes Duke-NUS's world-class research and promotes engagement with industry. PairX is our latest success story. It's a spin-out company from our cancer and stem cell biology signature research program. And this is the story that we're hoping that you will help us to celebrate as we go through today's Bio Entrepreneur event. The Bio Entrepreneurship series highlights translational work being done at the Duke-NUS Sing Health Academic Medical Centre. And we're excited in the next few editions of this series to be partnering with Biotech Connection for this series. And so with that, I'd like to pass you on to the President of Biotech Connection, Natasha Ng. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So hi, everyone. I'm Natasha from Biotech Connection Singapore, and we are super happy to be able to partner with Duke-NUS to work on this and present this Bio-Entrepreneurship series. For those of you who are not familiar with Biotech Connection Singapore, in a nutshell, we're a non-profit organization, and our goal is to promote life sciences entrepreneurship in Singapore. And through that, we have a platform that comprises events, our consulting services, as well as a communications arm to connect innovators in the biotech, medtech, and health tech space in Singapore. So it's a pleasure to be able to moderate today's session. And I would like to introduce our panelists to you. So first we have Dr. Raymond Lee. So Raymond is a research fellow at Duke-NUS Medical School in the Cancer and Stem Cell Biology program. His background is in developmental biology and cell signaling. So while working at David Epstein's laboratory, he studied mRNA splicing biology in cancer, and they developed a platform that PairX Bio is now using to develop next generation cancer immunotherapies. So Raymond is the scientific founder of PairX. And next, it's a pleasure to introduce to you XQ Lin. So XQ is a seasoned global life sciences business leader and entrepreneur. He helped to transform ESCO, a Singapore-based company, into a global life science and medical technologies group. He also founded ESCO Ventures in 2014, which has invested in several successful startups, as well as launched ESCO Ventures X in 2018, which is now Asia's springboard for biotech startups operating across Singapore and Boston. He's an investor in PairX Bio, which was also incubated at ESCO Ventures X. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Cheryl McCaffrey. Cheryl is the director of the Center for Technology and Development, or CTed, at Duke-NUS Medical School, and she helps with directing the development of commercialization strategies for inventions that arise from the school. Before Duke-NUS, she was Deputy Director of A-Star's Industry Development Group. And so Cheryl has combined an extensive experience in research management, IP management, collaborations, and startup formation, and has negotiated numerous large research and licensing deals, as well as been involved in establishing and licensing multiple startup companies. So it's a pleasure to have all these very esteemed and very experienced panelists on board with us today to introduce to you the story of PairX Bio. So to start off, perhaps Raymond is going to present to you one slide just to give people a quick background of what PairX Bio is all about. Over to Raymond.
Okay, thank you, Natasha, for the kind introduction. So I will just give you a brief idea of like what PairX is aiming to, right? So PairX Bio basically aims to develop novel cancer immunotherapy. And the technology that we actually develop actually revolves around the idea of identifying shared cancer antigens from aberrant splicing, right? So after identification of these shared antigens, we go through a process of validating whether these targets that we've identified can be used for developing cancer immunotherapeutics, right? So I'll just give you a quick overview of why there's sort of this unmet need for developing new cancer immunotherapy. So cancer immunotherapy has actually had very transformative clinical outcomes for cancer patients. However, there's actually this huge unmet need for identifying and utilizing new cancer antigens, right, to actually identify and make new therapeutics, right? So the technology that we have actually developed here in Duke-NUS actually revolves around this biology around aberrant mRNA splicing, right? So yeah, that's basically PairX Bio in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you, Raymond. So great. So now we will start off our panel discussion, and just to share with everyone, we will be opening up the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A section, and we'll try to address them at relevant times during the discussion, or we'll address them towards the end. Right, so I would love to start off with Raymond, continuing on from what he has mentioned. And, you know, as we have a lot of people in our audience today, which I believe are academic scientists or people who are looking to spin out technologies or looking for some way to commercialize the technologies in their lab. So for Raymond, from your perspective as a scientist, you know, who has worked in the lab, developed this technology, what were your challenges to spin out this technology from the lab? And along that way, what kind of support did you need and did you get?
Okay, so I think sort of like a key challenge for me as a scientist, right, in doing anything that's sort of like commercial, I think the main challenge is actually to understand what a biotech is, right? So what I mean by that is basically obviously there's a lot of R&D going on in a biotech startup, right? So it's the same thing as what you would expect in an academic setting. But I think the emphasis is sort of like in a biotech startup is basically this capability, right? You need to be able to show capability and using this capability to address a fundamental question, right? So for example, in our case, what we have done is that basically there's this huge unmet need of identifying new cancer antigens, right? So we are trying to like address that kind of need. So I think for a scientist, doing commercial work, this is something that we need to like fully understand, right? And sort of like another second major challenge as a scientist, right? So as a scientist, I would say like my comfort zone would be to sort of to deal with things which I'm familiar with, right? So the familiarity is kind of something that we will gravitate towards. So a major challenge during the process of sort of like spinning our company is basically dealing with this idea of like of unknowns, right? So basically there's a lot of like unknown in, for example, like IP, what is IP, what is, you know, what is a business venture, what are all of these things, right? And so having said that, I mean, the support that you actually require for doing this kind of work is basically having people who you can have like conversations with, right? And sort of like through these conversations, you try to like build trust, right? And understand what this person is trying to help you with, right? Because ultimately, like for example, like with Cheryl, right, the technology development department at Duke-NUS, there was this need to sort of like to understand what actually is an IP, right? What is a patent? How do you draft it and things like that? So it's basically you need to be able to like understand where this other person is coming from, right? And it's basically, for me, it was kind of like a huge like black box, right? I absolutely have no idea, right? It was like this mind-boggling exercise that we had like go through. So being able to have this kind of like a very simple like conversation to sort of like understand what the other person wants and you trying to like fulfill it, that really helps in doing any form of like startup, right? And then sort of like the same thing can be said for the conversations that we have with XQ, right, who is sort of our investor. So it's like basically the ability to have like building trust and then sort of like be comfortable with what is unknown. I think that I think is very important, right? And having said that, I think it was also useful, like my PI, David. So obviously he has a lot of experience in startup, right? So it's sort of like important to sort of like reassure yourself that, you know, these things, although they are a black box, you don't know what you're doing most of the time, right? So most of the time I'm like kind of like clueless about like things, what's going on and things like that. So the thing is, it's helpful to have someone like reassure you that, you know, this is just like the way it is, right?
Yeah.
Right. Just having
Yeah.
that kind of like reassurance is, I think, very helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
So indeed,
Yeah.
I mean, like you mentioned, you know, so many different parties make it happen.
Yeah.
And actually, we already have our first Q&A question here. So Alvin asked that he's interested to find out how long this idea was incubated for before the company was formed. So I guess from your perspective of the technological development, how long did it take before you actually this startup formed?
Actually, I mean, it has been quite a while. I can't really like put a date on it. So I would say that at least like when we found our first initial target, that was already like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, right? That was when we sort of like had this initial idea, and then we were sort of like excited and said and thinking that this was a method for identifying this new cancer antigens, right? So I would say like maybe 2 or 3 years. That would be my ballpark guess, but I could be totally wrong here because I kind of lost track of time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Similar to what you talked about just now, I mean, did you have to navigate the business and market aspects of your technology in this startup environment, or did you just focus on the, you know, really doing the science? Because yeah.
So I guess in terms of like navigating these two worlds, right? Sort of like the scientific world and then sort of like the business world. So I think I was sort of like involved in a little bit of like the business aspects of it, but a lot of it was actually done by XQ and Mayura, who were at ESCO Ventures. So that was like really helpful, right? But it's just basically having to, I mean, you sort of like, the process there is you build this sort of like relationship with these people, and then sort of it gets easier, right? Because they help you with understanding those aspects of the work, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. So then following that, I'm just wondering, and I thought maybe perhaps a lot of people who are in your shoes or about to be in your shoes are wondering, from now, how are you going to be managing your concurrent roles as an academic in Duke-NUS and a scientific co-founder of PairX? What's the path going to be like moving forward for you?
I guess I'm just going to say it is another like big black box. It's not entirely clear. So it's just like a lot of it is just business as usual. You can see that I'm still in my jeans and then like t-shirt, just like running experiments kind of thing. It's I would say it's still like that. You have to be comfortable with the unknown in a startup. I think that would be my overarching theme as a scientist, right? You sort of have to just believe that the various parties in the company is doing what's best for the company, right? And then just go with it. So in terms of like my role, I think it will still be primarily sort of a scientific role. So basically I'll be like doing experiments, designing experiments, right? And then at the same time, what will happen is basically there needs to be a lot of like conversations with the various parties in the company to sort of like develop and push the company forward, something like that, right? As to like a very specific role, I don't really have an answer for that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, we're starting to get a lot of questions. I mean, I love having all the questions come in. So I will try to address those that I think Raymond, you could answer. So there's one a bit more technical or scientific question by Deepa. So she said that cancer immunotherapy and new antigens is an exciting field. Could you perhaps share a bit on your approach of identifying these antigens? Are you looking at specific indications which have a high mutational burden as a first test market?
Okay, so in terms of like what we believe would make a good cancer immunotherapeutic target, right? So this target would definitely be something that is shared. So we don't necessarily believe in things which are mutations driven, because those things tend to be very personalized, and we feel that this is not a direction that we will go towards, because the idea for us is basically targeting shared antigens that you can validate, right? So that is, I think, a very large part of the company. right? And this is, I think, a more like practical solution to implementation of cancer immunotherapy, especially a more targeted version of it, right? Something like that.
Okay, great. Right, so another question by Ted. As someone who has been contemplating on startup, I'm not sure how whether you actually contemplated on starting up, years ago, but how mature does the technology need to be when you start spinning out the company? How much expertise as the founder do I need to be before I'm ready? Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, anyone can chip into XQ and Cheryl. So
yeah, I can't
Raymond
really
can
answer that. Yeah, I can't really answer that. I think you have to ask like XQ or Cheryl that particular question.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's a highly collaborative effort, right? The PI and the researchers in the institution, the technology transfer office that Cheryl and Chris, represent, and then the kind of early stage investors and kind of company builders like us, and yeah, actually, just to take a step back, generally now biotech VC is looking for platform technologies in therapeutics, and some platform technology that addresses one or two of the fundamental bottlenecks in therapeutic discovery that might be related also to specific modality or modalities such as small molecules or antibodies, or in this case T-cell, right, TCR T-cell therapies. And these platform technologies that address, one or two of these bottlenecks have the potential to generate multiple assets, so multiple drug candidates, products, right, product candidates that, could advance into clinical trials, and multiple, product candidates, drug candidates against different, indications, different diseases, in this case, different molecular subsets of cancer, which is table stakes nowadays, right? You don't talk about lung cancer, you talk about what's that molecular subset, right? And having that biomarker. So getting back to the question, it also depends on your audience, right? Like, is this kind of the early stage company builders like us? Is it more like the traditional Series A investor? Is it, kind of later stage, the big funds that do kind of the Series Bs and crossovers? So for us at least, right, which is maybe more relevant to this audience, which presumably, a lot of folks, in kind of academic setting thinking about spinning out a company. I mean, as long as you can show that this platform, has legs, right? If you have a first kind of product prototype candidate, in small molecule parlance, kind of like a hit, that's great. But actually, it also depends on how hot the space is. For example, for us, the gene editing companies, many of them were spun out by just showing that the gene editing works, in cells. Some of them didn't even work not even working yet in mammalian cells, right? And a lot of problem with delivery, right? They have to, have these contrived systems just to show that, okay, you can edit with certain efficiency. So it kind of depends on how hot the space is. In this case, David Epstein and Raymond showed that the platform was able to discover novel antigens that appeared to be public and shared across substantial subset of certain cancer type or types. And what we liked about this platform was that there's also the validation, without going into all the details, there's also kind of validation step in which patient material, PBMC, is used to confirm, such antigen, and then therefore to discover a pair, hence the name PairX, by kind of the T-cell antigen pair. And that's kind of like a hit, again, in, more classical small molecule parlance. So that's kind of like it's not really the product prototype, fully, right? But, it's kind of like, okay, this is kind of like the pre-product prototype, if you will, Yeah. So that's at least on the business front. And then, I mean, I personally think there's you can never be ready, right? So just, I think it's good to network and form relationships, and, always welcome to give us a call, if we can be helpful. Yeah.
So Natasha, I would agree with everything XQ just said. And I would say to the person who asked the question, if they're in Duke-NUS or SynHealth or an organization like ours and they have a CTed or a CTed equivalent, the best time to come and talk to somebody about what you've got and what you would like to do is now. So if you really are thinking that you might have something, come and talk to us as soon as possible, because whatever the technology is, we can help you to understand where you're up to in the scheme of things, what else might need to be done, how long it might take, and what might be needed to protect it if in fact it isn't yet protected. So if you just want to learn about the process and understand what will be required and how to go through it, just like Raymond talked about earlier, then come and talk to us anytime. We're always happy to help. And just bring questions. And if in fact you have something, and it sounded like this person did, that they're thinking about, could this work? Is this technology that I can protect or commercialize? Then come and talk to us. Bring the data. Let us see what it is that you have and whether it is an invention. Sometimes researchers come with something that is the best thing since sliced bread and they're passionate about, obviously, because all researchers are, but it may not be an invention yet, because scientists tend to generally look for mechanistic understanding of the biology. And when they've got that, they think that's eureka. Yeah. And it is eureka, but it's not an invention. So we need to talk through how do we have to approach what you've got now to develop it into something which legally could be protected and which a person like XQ might then see the value of, because protection gives you a lot of value, and then want to invest in. So just come as early as possible with what you've got and let's have a conversation. It's not necessarily the case that it has to be very late stage to be investable. I would say, I hope XQ agrees with me, that this technology isn't particularly late stage, but it's very exciting. There's some validation data. It's in a very hot space, and XQ is willing to take a bet. So you never know.
Definitely second that, Cheryl, yeah.
Match the technology to the person who wants to invest in it, and that can happen at any stage.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, thanks for sharing.
And I was also sort of like trying to add, right, that basically this kind of thing will only happen if you have like the intention, right? So I think it's important to first have the intention to sort of like commercialize, and then think about what problem you're trying to like address, right? And these things will never come about if you don't try to have a conversation with various parties, right? With potential investors, with tech development officers, things like this, right? It must start with like basically having a conversation and building the trust that goes along with it, right? Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Raymond. So I think this is a very good sort of transition into our next discussion that we'd like to have with XQ. So I think this is focused a lot more on the investment part. So I mean, to XQ, as a life science venture capitalist and incubator, what are you looking for in the technology or the team altogether before you decide to co-develop, invest, incubate? And this can be in the context of how PairX came about, but also in your other experiences.
So I will maybe answer it generally. But first of all, I forgot to say just now, thanks again, BCS, Chris, and Duke-NUS for putting this together and giving us the opportunity to share our experiences this morning. Back to the question here. I think science is fundamental, right? So we are very scientifically oriented, as most, early stage biotech VCs are. So, good science but it's kind of table stakes, like, that's the first aspect. The second aspect is, again, as I mentioned just now, we're generally looking for platform technologies that can generate multiple, drug candidates, assets. It's really a function of the capital markets and the general broad availability of capital, although at early stage, not necessarily in Singapore. Actually, generally, maybe not necessarily in Singapore, but a general function of the broad availability of capital, meaning that investors are, and the later stage investors that are our kind of downstream customers, quote unquote, if you will, that we syndicate these companies with, they are generally looking for, again, platform technology. So, and the argument is that, if the chance of success is 10%, at least you can get many shots on goal, right? So then you have some chance to get something. I think this business is in the general biotech, is kind of like portfolio risk management, right? So again, second aspect would be, therefore, platform technology. The third aspect, as I said, right, some kind of, appropriate level of validation of the platform technology. Obviously, we are not investing in a vacuum. We are monitoring the global landscape. We are, we can't predict the future, of course, right? But we can focus on, what we do is really, we spend a lot of time understanding, and we have quite a large team. We have the largest team in Singapore now, I think, of any biotech VC, really understanding the fundamental bottlenecks in the respective therapeutic modalities and also what's happening out there, what are the latest clinical results or latest, companies being spun out or funded by the big VCs, right? And then obviously we try to find some, Venn diagram, some kind of fit, right? Good science platform, something differentiated, exciting story. And then last but not least, looking for, I think kind of great scientists that are also aligned towards the same mission. I think as Raymond said, the intention to do a startup is not easy, right? I mean, I think all of you are great scientists, and you have so much on your plate, and you are doing such a great job to contribute to the body of knowledge for humanity, and then to do a company, right? But I mean, that's why, again, I think it's, as I said, it's collaboration and partnership, right? I think Chris and Cheryl, the office, does a great job, right? And then, private sector actors like us, right? We can help and, bring the funding and also bring kind of that business, scientific business expertise and access to global, drug development expertise. So, and then maybe just quick look under the hood, right? So we first met Raymond and David in the context of this project. Wow. Almost 2 years ago, right? Yeah. I think it's almost, is it? Yeah. My memory is
I don't remember. I don't.
Almost 2 years ago,
It's like a haze,
and
right?
it was kind of early then, right? And then, basically we saw like great progress. Raymond is super solid, he's a machine, and then David is, he's really great, right? He's super experienced. Cheryl, of course, really great to work with as well. And I think, we saw the scientific progress, and honestly, we kind of followed the field, and it was a bit uncertain, where the TCR field going. And then there's some seminal results came out earlier this year. I must just being transparent, that Adapt Immune, had some great results. And then suddenly this is like hot again, because when we first shown this, then it was kind of couched as like neoantigen based, and it's better than neoantigens, but that started to become a bad word in the circle in Boston, because Gritstone and some of the other companies were really struggling, but obviously different modality, they were kind of doing the personalized peptide vaccines, which, kind of struggling, right? I don't think, that's tough, They've shown some immunogenicity, but really not really much significant clinical responses. Not even partial responses, I think. So, so it was kind of like, okay, this is great people to work with, very good science, obviously, homegrown, and then, the kind of the global trends, suddenly the stars align, Chinese saying, 天时地利人和, right? So the right place, the right people, the right time,
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I love to see the dynamics between you guys, and can tell that you guys have gone through a lot in the past couple of years trying to put this together. So a broader question for you, XQ, and I also spot this question in the Q&A box. What can you say about the trends that you're seeing in the biotech startup environment? And this can be related to cancer immunotherapy, cell therapy landscape. And this person also asked, how do you foresee this, the future of this biotech environment in Singapore to grow an SME to a big company? Do you have any comment about that? And I think there was also another question, sorry to give you multiple questions, but I think they're all linked. There was a question in the registration that asked whether you had any advice for fundraising. So I think if you can talk a little bit about the investment landscape, that would be great as well.
Okay, many questions in one. So first of all, biotech is very hot now. There's, the big VCs have a lot of funding. Obviously, they are generally not here. I think it is thanks to all of your efforts, it's really, the century of biology, right? I think now the tools that we have at our disposal, we are able to ask, you folks are able to ask all of these, brilliant questions, and then generate these insights, some of which, might be substrate, for starting a company on. They remain, many unmet medical needs, right? Many cancers, for which, there's not really great treatments yet. Obviously some breakthroughs, in some, again, subtypes and in some modalities. So in terms of the trends, I think, rising, kind of age of biology, right? A lot of, funding available, although not necessarily always here, but definitely globally. A lot of unmet medical needs that are not yet solved. So I think it's a very exciting time, it's a privilege. And I don't think it would be too unreasonable to imagine that in the next 100, 200 years, maybe 100 years, humanity will make great progress against against addressing, diseases, right? Unfortunately, not enough work on prevention, you know, the old adage, prevention better than cure. And this is, I don't want to go into this, but it's just due to the kind of the payment system, right? But again, we've seen, I think, cancer screening now, you know, it's a tough area, but, you know, there's a lot of new funding in that space. Then again, I would focus more on, at least commercially, more on therapeutics. We also actually initially started medical device diagnostics, but now we are 100% therapeutics and basically 100% platform technologies. In terms of, yeah, some of the trends in immunotherapy, I mean, yeah, obviously a lot of advancements in cell therapies and even beyond T cells, you know, new cell types, right? I think cost is still an issue, although in the advanced countries, you know, it will get paid for. It is getting paid for. But yeah, therefore, you know, efforts on like allogeneic, you know, T cells, so that it will be more of an off-the-shelf product. I think it will have to go there in the long term. I mean, solid tumor is still an issue, the tumor microenvironment. Yeah. So again, you know, very exciting, right? Because as long as they are kind of initial potential solutions, then those could be companies, you know, those could be spin-outs and new companies. In terms of the, yeah, I think the Singapore ecosystem and funding landscape, it's still very early. Singapore is a very rich country, but there's not a lot of early stage investors. We are one of the most active now, along with obviously some of our peers. We are, yeah, excited to be also doing our bit, you know, to build the ecosystem. We have launched even a pre-seed grant funding to fund, you know, PIs and their labs, you know, without taking any IP rights. To, you know, those that have interesting platform technologies that again could be the substrate for future spin out. Yeah, we have the Morphosis, you know, fellowship program. So, you know, I think we have great talent in Singapore, maybe just lacking a bit of exposure. So kind of, yeah, great, you know, young talent, you know, those who don't want to go down the typical academic path, you know, maybe join our fellowship program. We expose them to kind of biotech and VC. I think I must have missed one or two questions, Natasha. Just
no, I think you did manage to address most of them. That's great. So I think this is precisely the kind of platform that we want to have to, you know, provide people with exposure and awareness so that they can start, you know, thinking about these important things in terms of commercializing technology. So thank you.
Maybe just one more point, you know, that we have all grown. I mean, there may still be lingering. I think it's changed a lot last couple of years, but to the extent that, you know, anybody wants to do something, again, I would just say platform therapeutics. That's where the action is. Yeah, I think there's, you know, in the past, there was a lot of, you know, and there's a lot of good stuff happened in medical devices and diagnostics, but I mean, the action is really in therapeutics. So I'll leave it as that.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll move on to Cheryl, and I think we were really inundated by a lot of questions. So I want to make sure that we have a chance to address most of those questions. But to Cheryl, I think there's a lot of interest in this space, and I think your position really merges, you know, what Raymond has talked about, what XQ has talked about. So from the perspective of an academic and research institution, what are the top priorities or considerations when licensing a technology to a startup?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. And as the others said, thanks for having us do this with you today. And thanks to all the people for attending and listening. Academic perspective, okay. I like to think about a startup from the point of view of it being something that has three pillars to hold it up. So it has to have really good technology, it has to have people to do something with that technology, and of course it needs to have money. It's a bit like a three-legged chair. If any one of those things is not there, it's going to fall over. So in our case, obviously we bring the technology. The other things that we need are people and money. So if you think about this scenario for PairX, the people we had initially inside are Raymond and David. Raymond, you've just heard, he's obviously incredibly capable. He's very willing, witnessed by some of the things he said when he spoke. He's very willing to share with us and have us understand what the technology is that he's got. And he's also very willing to know that he doesn't know everything and is willing to ask questions and learn what we do. So that gives complementarity and that gives collaboration, and that helps to build trust, which is another thing he said. So we have that person, very passionate and very dedicated and driven, doesn't sleep, works really hard all the time on this technology. And then we had David, out of industry, loads of experience in taking things to market, very well linked into the network scene, just raised lots of money for his other startup, Black Diamond. And so pretty experienced person to work with from the point of view of developing the technology and from the point of view of being a founder of a startup. Plus, I had had the pleasure of working with him directly in CTed for 5 years. So I knew that I could work with him. I knew that we had complementary skill sets. I knew that there was trust and respect between us, the same as between Raymond and CTed. So all of those things for people inside builds the possibility to do something together. Then you need those people in the outside as well. And those people in the outside at the moment are David, and to a lesser extent, because we've still got Raymond, to a lesser extent Raymond. But David's not with us anymore, so we know that he's out there, and he, together with Raymond, are very capable of building a team, and we trust him and Raymond, and with XQ, I'll come to the money in a minute, to put other people into this venture to make it work. So there's got to be the people and the right people and those people who can collaborate. It's a team sport, this doing a startup, and it's long term. So you've got to have stamina too. And so then with knowing that we had the people and the right people for the company, of course there's no guarantee, but the best as we can possibly see, it looks like a good starting point. Then you need the money. So then we had XQ, who came along and was very interested. We worked with him for quite a long time. I think he said probably 2 years, it may have been longer. We started talking about incubating this technology in January last year. So that's more than 18 months when we really started to sit down and say, okay, let's do this together. And we spent about 6 or 7 or 8 months doing that before we started negotiations around licensing the technology to the company. So we knew that we could work with him. We knew that he was interested, we knew he had the money, and we knew that this team was gelling in a way that would give it a very strong possibility, I want to say probability of success. So those are the things, technology we had, and then the top considerations, the people that can make it work, and the money that wants to help make it work. And one more point I would make, because scientists often don't realize this, but I've seen it lots of times and it really is true. If you have really good people with the money, you can turn not very good technology into fantastic success. But the best technology in the world will not fly if you have, I don't know what adjective to use, but not very good people trying to do it. So it's, and I'm sure XQ will agree, they want the technology, but they really look for the management. You've really got to have good people to do this. So technology, management, and people, those are the things.
Yeah.
Just
I
to
will definitely
add on, if I
Money.
can, I think I think people are the most important. In this case, our model is kind of together to build the management. I don't think we're expecting the scientific founders to be, obviously David is very unique and it's really our honor and pleasure to work with him on this company. But I don't think you get like David Epstein kind of type all the time. So it's more about, you know, if there's great science and the substrate, you know, then together we build the management, and generally we have to access global resource in the end of the day, because we don't have all of the drug development, you know, preclinical development skill sets, regulatory skill sets necessarily yet in Singapore. Yeah.
That's right. Yep. It's a team sport.
Yes.
Yeah, I would also add to the conversation, right, by also saying that obviously, I mean, because the reason why it's a team sport is because you basically will not find a single entity that is able to do all the components, right? So definitely you need to kind of like, you need to develop the relationships between people with diverse skill sets, and then sort of to have this venture, right? Because this is what it is, right? It's a venture, right? It's a venture into the great unknown. And then sort of like, how do you be comfortable with in the wild, right? Basically having like multiple experts and believing that the experts will do whatever is required to sort of like move the thing forward, right? I think that's I think that's the take-home message, right? I think.
Yeah. Great. Thank you all for sharing on that point. So I'm looking at the Q&A, and there's one question for you, Cheryl, which is, how do you envision the tech transfer departments adapting to the new format of spin-offs where the scientific founder still retains academic research appointments?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Where the scientific founder still what?
Retains academic research appointments.
Okay, this is an interesting question. It's really one of policy. So in Singapore in general, I think it's true to say, and certainly true in Duke-NUS, the founders of the company cannot be executives in the company. If the founders want to stay as staff on salary working for Duke-NUS, that's their primary role. They do have the capability to consult. At the moment, I think it's 20% of their time. So that's something they can do on an SAB. Any consulting capacity doesn't, not just for their startup, but for anybody. So as long as it's not more than that 20%, it's possible to do both of the things that this person is asking about. But it would be a very obvious conflict of interest to be working in the company as well as working in the school. And particularly in circumstances where, for example, the company might want to contract research work back to the school, which is in fact what we're doing with PairX. So that makes it very problematic. I know that this is not true in lots of places. I think in the States there's more flexibility, but I also think that there is, and I'm not an expert on this, so don't quote me, but I think there are cases where you can have both roles, but there's some limitations on what you can do. And sometimes people working in roles in the United States and some of the universities have time where they're not actually doing work for the university, and they can therefore do this work in that time. But it's not, I'm not an expert on that, so I just know that it's different in different countries around the world, but here, that's the rule, and mostly it stems from this issue of conflict of interest. Of course you can leave. You could become half-time and then go and work half-time in your startup. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's quite an upvoted question. How do you deal with filing a patent at the expense of publication, especially when you cannot be sure if your IP will be commercialized yet? I think that's a question for a lot of scientists to think about.
There's multiple questions there actually, but let me answer it from 2 points of view. How do you deal with filing a patent and publication? Just from the point of view of knowing that we want to protect something and knowing that the person who's developed it wants to publish it. Let's just think about that for the moment. That's very easy to manage. We just need to develop on drafting a manuscript at the same time as we work with an attorney to figure out what's the invention and draft the patent specification. The fundamental rule is you patent before you publish, because if you don't, you lose any possibility of getting the legal protection and the rights that you want in order to protect that invention. So you must file the patent application before the publication date of the manuscript. But it's possible to manage that process so that both things happen. We're not saying don't do that for 6 months while we file a patent, then start writing your manuscript. The two can be done in parallel, and in fact it's very helpful for a patent attorney drafting a patent specification to have a manuscript in front of him to help guide what is this invention and what are the data and what's going into this specification. So that part's very manageable. There was a second part to the question you asked. Can you just say the question again?
How do you deal with it, especially when you cannot be sure if your IP will be commercialized?
Right. So that's a different question. That comes back to how we in CTed assess the technology from the point of view of its readiness, whether it is an invention. As I said before, sometimes it isn't yet, and other things need to be done, and other angles need to be had, and more data needs to be generated to make it possible to see that it's commercially applicable. And so there might be a timing issue there where we need to do more things before we file. Whether it's commercializable or not brings in a whole host of other things. Some of the things we talked about before, like what's in the market already? How many people are there working on this? How stiff is the competition? Are there people that are 2 years ahead of you that you need to be better than? Are we better than them? How can we be better than them? Over what period of time can we make sure that we're better than them? Do we want to take this risk? So there's lots of questions. What's the size of the market? Is this something that's a cure for cancer that will, obviously everybody will want to invest in? Or is it something much more niche where we might be able to find potential investors, or we might be able to find a licensee that's working in that particular, say, orphan drug area? Or is it a platform technology, as XQ said, that lots of investors are looking for? So we need to assess all of those sorts of things in coming to a view about whether it's commercializable or not, or whether we need to send the researcher back to do a bit more work before we can actually make that assessment. If that happens, and in the meantime they want to publish something, then we're into negotiation. Right? How badly do you want to publish right now versus how badly do you want us to think about whether this could be commercialized in some other way? And then, you know, if the person doesn't want to go down our pathway, we can't make them. So then it's a negotiation. But just managing the process, if you're definitely going to publish and protect it, managing that process is relatively straightforward.
Okay, great. There's a very related question on the patenting part. So Roshan asked, so can you file the provisional application and then submit the manuscript? And I guess in the next 12 months, submit the PCT?
So that's what I was just describing. But there's a caveat on that, which I'll come to in a minute. So generally, you have to file before you get the manuscript published. So actually, it's a timing issue. You can actually submit the manuscript and have it reviewed confidentially under reviewers while we're drafting the patent specification, provided that it doesn't go up online. The key thing is it cannot be published before the filing date of the patent application. So yes, we can file the patent application, work on the manuscript, submit the manuscript, and get it published as long as the patent application is filed first. And then 12 months after your filing date, then you convert to the PCT and you add many more data, hopefully, that you've generated in that 12 months into the patent specification. The caveat that I want to add to that is that if it's very, very valuable and we're not quite sure whether this invention might change a little bit in this next 12 months, have we captured completely what we want in the patent specification, or might we bend a little bit or pivot or add some other nuance in that we haven't thought of yet? It might be advantageous to not publish until after you file the PCT, because in that 12-month period, you can change and add in. After the 12-month period, you cannot. So it's a difficult negotiation, this one, because generally once the patent is filed, the rule is you can then publish. But from a patent specialist point of view in commercializing inventions, 4 years down the track, we will get your publication cited against us, even though it was after the filing date, because it's before the publication date of the patent application. That only happens at 18 months. So there are nuances in the patent law that mean that we still have to kind of deal with these things. And the other thing is, if in that 12-month period that you alluded to between provisional and PCT filing, you've changed it somewhat, and what you published at 3 months is not what you added into the document at 6 months, then you might have pre-published a very important aspect that you want to take on when you get to the PCT at 12 months. So it's always good to have really good communication between me or the person that you're dealing with in the technology transfer group and the scientists to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's managing what you do over that 12-month period.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cheryl. Bottom line is speak to Cheryl, someone in your tech transfer office. Right, so I think we'll spend the rest of the time answering, still a lot of questions coming in. And I think XQ, was there a question that you wanted to answer? And
I think there was. I've been a bit proactive and tried to answer the few that I think were directed towards me on the chat group, on the Q&A box, I mean. I think there was a question about what's that pathway to Series B, Series C. I think that's a great question, and this is something that we are forging as we speak. So the model that we see is to source the science locally, but also regionally. I think Singapore, has punches above its weight, right? Thanks to the far-sighted investments of the government. We have great science, great talent. And then to incubate the companies in Singapore, because usually at the early stage, you need to be physically close to the tech transfer office, to the scientific founders. The technology is, usually physically transferred out of the lab, obviously, under a license, right? And, there might be some movement of personnel as well. So logistically, it's quite helpful to do it kind of close, in close proximity, physical proximity. But very quickly, for example, in the case of Carmine Therapeutics that we kind of announced, the launch of last year. We have also expanded that to Boston, landed at Lab Central, one of the top incubators in Boston, and then, being able, therefore, to be physically in front of the big pharma partners, the later stage investors, the big US VCs. And we just announced a deal with Takeda. Takeda Ventures has invested in Carmine Therapeutics, and Carmine has executed a $900 million deal with Takeda for 2 targets. So, I mean, there's no easy way out. We'll have to work, cross-continentally, cross-border. We will have to, these companies will need to have sites in the US. They will not leave Singapore. Yeah, we expect to be able to keep the discovery firmly anchored in Singapore, and even hopefully the manufacturing down the line. I think we have an obligation to create economic value capture for the nation, right? And job creation, this is key, especially, in these kind of pandemic, kind of challenging economic times. So basically the short answer is we have to work cross-border. We have to bring these things to the US, and, it's not easy, right? That's why, we need to work together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. On the related
Could also be China in the future, by the way. Yeah, it depends on the phenotype. There's kind of a US phenotype of company. This innovative discovery platform usually more suited for the US. US investors get it. There's kind of early IPO pathway on the NASDAQ. But then there are some other types that could also actually go to China. Yeah.
Right. So in this case, there's a question on which are the markets you are looking to expand in the near future.
So as I answered in one of the Q&A box, for innovative discovery platform like PairX, it's usually US focused, right? The US has the big VCs that would invest in the Series B, Series C, has the capital markets. These companies can go public even before clinical trials. So you use the public markets to finance, the clinical stage risk. The US has, still the greatest density of talent, right? It's very complex, right? This part that was developed at Duke is the kind of antigen identification and validation, and getting to the kind of the initial pairs, but then to take these pairs and then to generate actual products, candidates, to go through the whole preclinical development pathway and IND enabling studies, and file the IND. That's that kind of expertise we're still missing a bit in Singapore. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think hopefully we'll be able to train up more. Yeah, we even have another program that we have just launched. It's called Project Beacon. So we're hiring Singaporeans, send them to Boston, work in our companies and work at ESCO Ventures in Boston, get trained by the most experienced folks there. Some of the folks, may want to come home one day and then bring the expertise back home. Yeah. So basically organizing this kind of cross-border, yeah. It's not easy. Time zones and yeah.
Thank you. So there's a question. Go ahead, Cheryl.
There's a couple of things here. I'm just taking a leaf out of XQ's book and looking at the questions that have come in. And there's a couple here that I can answer relatively quickly. There's one that's more of a comment than a question that says, in 25 years of experience in academia, consulting and finance in the biotech industry, and now the question moved. Where is it? Basically, he's saying, let scientists be scientists and get other people to do the other roles. Too many questions came in and the whole thing's moved now, but I can't read it all out because I can't see it anymore. But I just want to say to that person that I agree. So I think scientists often think that they can do, and this is not true of Raymond, clearly from what he said before, that they can do everything that needs to be done in a startup. One of the things that I think a scientist needs to learn to do is know when it's time to let go. It's their baby, but the baby won't be grown to man or woman by them alone. It's a team sport, and there need to be other people brought to bear to do the things that rely on business acumen, raising money, figuring out the milieu of working out in the corporate competitive environment of a business. And scientists who have been in academia most of their professions are not used to doing that, and they don't have the skill set to do it. So I completely agree with this comment. Scientists can stay the CEO, the CTO, the CSO, still have a role in the company, maybe stay at Duke-NUS and be on the scientific advisory panel, but not necessarily take on a role such as COO or CEO or chief business officer either, not necessarily. So I completely agree with that comment.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl.
Just to maybe add on one more point, I think, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I think there's also a role for the experienced postdocs that had, working in the PI's lab. Honestly, they did the work, right? Like Raymond did the work. I think there's a role for, the experienced postdoc to maybe join the company as kind of maybe director of discovery, that kind of level. So not per se CSO that needs, maybe a bit more, right, stripes under your arm and, having taken something to IND. But definitely not CEO, because that you need someone who can raise the money, and that's a skill set on its own usually.
Yeah, completely agree. And yes, if Raymond wants to join the company in a year or two, that would be fantastic because that will increase its chances of success.
Yeah.
We want, of course.
And obviously,
Raymond,
the key is that someone like Raymond, has to be quite open-minded like he is. And then, as the investors bring in the more experienced drug developers, the people with experience in, kind of path to IND and IND, enabling studies and kind of the whole TCR, T-cell optimization, right? Hit to lead, so to speak, again, in small molecule parlance. Then, we have to be able to forge the team, and Raymond has to be able to, be able to work with them and, and not saying who is in charge of who, right? But we need to be able to forge this team, like, because you need a lot of skill sets, and these skill sets are not necessarily in Singapore. That's the other logistical challenge.
What I was also going to say, right, is that, as like a scientist, and sort of like a co-founder, you sort of like would want like the best for for the company, right? So sometimes that is kind of like just letting go, right? It's like you have to like basically acknowledge that you're not going to be expert at everything, right? So in terms of like for myself, what I realized is that at least in the initial part, I can sort of like play a bit more of an active role in sort of like shaping the science, right? Like the directions of like what things where we should like put a bit more like effort into, that kind of thing. But eventually, if plus sort of like I can grow and then learn, step up to like learning more like management things, like all business aspects, then my role can change, right? But if let's say I can't pick up those things, then it's basically time to sort of like let it go, right? So something like that, right? So you just have to like accept that is what it is, what it is, right? Yeah.
There's also a very classic article in the Harvard Business Review. Do you want to be rich or king? Usually you can't have both.
That's right.
Right? So I'll just say that Raymond has very substantial amount of founder stock in PairX, right? 1% of 1 billion is $10 million, right? But obviously you're not going to get to 1 billion by controlling everything yourself. You have to bring in investors, you have to agree to get diluted, you have to share control with other people, or, kind of give up responsibilities, because the skill sets needed to get to the 1 billion are, definitely beyond any individual person.
That's definitely right. It's a small percentage of a very big number is much better than a big percentage of zero.
and that's actually kind of the mindset issue that in general, I think we still face in Asia, right? Versus in the US, everybody knows, okay, my job is I do the science in the lab. I, call my friends, the VC friends, spin out the company. I get, some percentage, right? If it works, Bob Langer is a billionaire, he owns apparently 3% of Moderna stock, right? And Bob Langer has many companies, he doesn't bother to control or run any of the companies, right? He's billionaire, Yeah. So that's the logic in the US, and we need to work together to kind of bring the same logic to, this part of the world, because this is the only way to make it work, Yeah.
Great. So I just want to let everyone know, we're coming to 12 now, and I know that the panelists have kindly agreed to spend about 10 to 15 more minutes to address some of the remaining questions. So those of you who are able to continue staying on, thank you very much. If I move on to the next question, so Deepa is curious about what's the MVP for this company, and I take that means minimum viable product. And moving forward, what will the approach or timeline be for the next steps of commercialization? I guess any of you can take this question if you like to.
I think that's a question for the company, because the company is now formed and the technology rights are licensed to it. Part of our role continuing is to do more research, as I mentioned before, under contract to the company. So we still have Raymond, he's our guy, and he's still working the way he's worked for the last years, 24/7, and generating more data and information that can go into validating and broadening the position that we have already licensed to the company. So it's clear in any company, you need to validate the product and you need to take it down the pipeline towards something that can be a product that's got regulatory approval and is sold in the market. And so that needs to be done. And also, if you want to keep the legal protection that you have, you need to get the patent rights to encompass it. And so you need breadth as well. And in this particular scenario, we want the technology developed more and more of them, these pairs, but we also want it for more and more cancers and more different pairs for different subsets of particular cancer sufferers. So all of that is moving forward, more work to be done in the company. That doesn't address the question, the next steps for commercialization. It's more about development in the company. Because commercialization now, we've had one commercialization event, that was licensing it to the company. Now it's up to the company to take it, and then the next commercialization event for them depends on what they want to do. They might want to license early to somebody, they might want to raise more money from somebody and give away some rights, they might want to develop all in-house and then sell a product. They can decide what the product is. So now I'll hand over to XQ to really address that sort of question.
Sorry, I was replying to the other questions. I got a bit lost. Sorry, what's the...
Sorry, so it was really, what's the next commercialization event for the company?
Okay, so just to keep things simple, in this game, and I use it in a I use the word game in a philosophical, not in a in kind of a philosophical perspective, not in a flippant way, of course. It's a very important game, right? Because we have to bring life-saving therapeutics to patients. Even if we fail, we must try. The patients are waiting, right? All of us have, close friend, relative afflicted with some terrible, disease, right? Yeah. So in this, in this game, the key is money, right? The key is what are the critical, steps of experiments, or the critical experiments, or the critical questions for which, if we can get, the answers we hope we will get, right? You never know, right? It's research. That, that data set will then allow us to get the next round of funding from the global US investors or Chinese or, kind of global investors. So actually it's all about following the money and you have a finite runway, usually, if usually a couple of years, right? And then within a year, you better generate some good data and then you better get more money and then you can go and blast away and then get next data set to get even more money, Yeah. So that's a simple way. It's just follow the money, Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to mention quickly before some people have to go or the attendees have to drop off, I wanted to make sure that we get the word out there that BCS and Duke-NUS with myself and Chris, we already have our next joint webinar in the works, and it's going to be on the 21st of October at 11 a.m. And this time we are having a fireside chat with Sebastian Schaefer, who is co-founder of biotech startup Enleofen, which is a spin-out from Duke-NUS Medical School and the National Heart Center, Singapore. So we will share information about the sign-up for this event soon, so do watch out for it. Right, so back to this conversation. There is a question that's been hanging around out there by Wei Jie, and the question is, if you can travel back in time to 2-3 years ago, what would you have done differently to speed up the spin-out process at XQ Ventures?
That's a really interesting question. I'd be happy to hear what the others have to say about it, but my view is that the answer is probably not very much different, because when David first came to me with this, which was about, it might be 4 years ago, it was in that space, which I mentioned before, where there was really interesting science and really interesting new mechanism. Okay, let's see if we can get shared antigens. Let's use differential RNA splicing, different approach than other parties, but not really any obvious invention or what would we do with this or how would we protect it. We spent a lot of time, more than a year, talking about how would we capture this and how would we protect it. So I think at the time he first came to me, it was in that category of not yet ready, not ripe, not cooked. When he came back the second or third time, then it was, okay, now we've got the data, now we've got something we can work with. Now we need to talk to some attorneys and figure out how can we do this. And we did that with 2 different attorneys before we actually started working on filing something. So 2 to 3 years ago, it wasn't ready, Wei Jie. Last year, it was ready. And then last year we had XQ come in and they were interested, that they wanted to incubate it first. So we did a project for several months where we were looking at, can we work together? Can we get this more validation data? It doesn't look like it's going to be something that I, XQ, ESCO want to invest in. That took some months. And once they were all convinced, then we sat down and negotiated a license agreement. And that didn't take very long at all, actually. By Christmas, we'd done the deal. the thing that held it up this year was actually not COVID. It was the fact that they got a second investor, which is super duper good. But that meant that other investor wanted to crawl all over everything and think about it and do their due diligence. And then the shareholders agreement had to be renegotiated. All those things took time. But that was time that we were very prepared to wait for, because that was a really good outcome, that we've now got 2 investors, more money in the bank, and a better capitalized startup company.
And it's
So
not official yet, but looks like we have a top US investor joining. Fingers crossed, in contracting. Yeah, and that's great, right? It's kind of like snowball effect, and that's we're so proud as well,
Right. That's right. So I'm interested in your view, XQ, but I don't think you knew about it 3 years ago, but you probably knew about it 2 years ago. Would we have done something different to speed up this process? From your point of view.
It kind of feels like right place, right time, because to be honest, right, as I even said, even last year, the mood was not kind of like going back and forth, the mood in Boston, neoantigens, are you sure, they all don't work, like what's new this time? So we were, even though we are very scientifically oriented, we also was grappling with that. And, you just have to read the tea leaves, and there's just kind of, have to be the right place, right time. So no, I wouldn't say so. It feels like the right place, right time right now.
Yeah.
Me, I would also sort of like second that as well. So I think it took the time it took because we needed to like build trust, right? So we needed to be, we really needed to get to a place where everybody felt comfortable, and this was like the next logical step, right? I think then I wouldn't say that there's kind of like anything that we could sort of like hasten the process. Right?
Yeah, I would say, thanks to David and Raymond's vision, and also the patient, funding, by Duke and the public institutions, my suggestion is better to be early than late, better to work on something that is, again, it has to be a platform. It has to be able to generate multiple therapeutic assets, but something that is, new and early and, this kind of thing, right? Then the dawn will come and then suddenly the thing explodes, right? You rather be early than late. And I think David and Raymond, and again, thanks to the funding support of the public institutions and Duke, David has that vision, kind of been there, done that with Black Diamond, right? And then suddenly then it happens, I'm still, I'm really fascinated and, learning so much working with, David and Raymond. And I'm even thinking there's some kind of a logic or some kind of a pattern here. I'm trying to like crystallize it, beyond the obvious platform therapeutics that we all know that, right? Yeah. I think it's also about new biology that identifies these new interesting subsets in cancer patients. Black Diamond basically the similar story, right? And then the platform is rapidly able to get to products. So it's not just discovering targets and then you have to, there's some, special thing in it. And it's all kind of like from patient material, which is very interesting because, a lot of the systems are contrived, right? Yeah, and the elegance here is that there's validation step with, without going into details on the kind of the patient material. Yeah. Right. So maybe that's a phenotype, for applying that kind of thinking to other areas of biology, right? This is mRNA splicing, but, there's all stuff now like long non-coding RNAs, epitranscriptomics, there's probably applying that thinking to new area of biology, but similar kind of phenotype. I think there could be many more companies to come. Yeah.
Right. So on that related note, Peter asked, so were there, I know you said it's the right time, right place, but was there an indication that told you, okay, this is the trigger, this is a market?
Honestly, was the adapt immune results. That was, I'll just be blunt, you kind of see what's going on and then like, wow, this works, man. Okay, we got to jump on this bandwagon. What are we waiting for? Right.
At least for me, it was like basically we did another screen, and then we found like additional targets. And that was the moment, right?
And Raymond showed that it was productive. The subsequent screens also threw out more pairs. It's like, okay, it's not one hit wonder,
It's not
initially it's not like, maybe one hit wonder,
Maybe I was lucky, right?
Yeah, just lucky, right? Right. Yeah. Because in this case, the biology is not fully fleshed out, honestly, but it's like very interesting and, and then the trick is that you don't need to go down the whole academic path and like explain. As long as it works, and there's some level of explanation and it kind of makes sense, right? And then you have like big names on the SAB usually to kind of get that credibility out there and, big investors. it's really fascinating. You know, I think there's so much opportunity. You know, this kind of similar phenotype, and then apply to all these new areas of biology now that, again, with the tools that we have, we can interrogate quite inexpensively compared to, let's say, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So I think we can have one last question to sort of wrap up the whole session. And I think this is also targeted at any of you, Raymond, XQ, and Cheryl. And I know we talked about this question a lot in our previous discussion. So do you have any advice, or can you comment on how aspiring entrepreneurs, of which, you know, a lot of attendees must be, can pitch to VCs, pitch to the target market, pitch to collaborators, from each of your perspectives? Like, how can we best, you know, do this pitching?
Just call Esco Ventures X. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, you know, just we can have a coffee, and, you know, we have quite a large team, you know, we can, set up a chat, you know, and just to get it out there, we are really not in the business of, you know, sniffing around for fun or, you know, copying anybody's ideas. You know, first of all, we have a reputation to protect, you know, if we, you know, and secondly, honestly, we have so many things to do now. We have so many companies, and, you know, it's, you know, I mean, yeah, obviously, you know, there's an art, right? Don't tell us confidential things that you shouldn't tell us. Describe the problem that you are solving, and what is this bottleneck in therapeutics, right? And then show some data that prove that, you know, it's not just an idea, right? And then, you know, obviously we are very happy to sign a piece of paper as well, right? CDA and that sort of thing. I think we have to learn from the US ecosystem. It's much more open there. Here we're kind of a bit siloed, a bit reserved, and kind of like afraid, you know? I mean, just literally just call us, right? We just have coffee, you know, chat, right? You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to tell us, you know?
I agree with that, XQ, about the silo and the reticence. I think there is quite a lot of that here that doesn't need to.
Can't move forward otherwise, you know. The patients are waiting.
But also, I would say, and I would say first, there is something I want to say, but before I say it, I will say something else, and that is know who your audience is.
Yeah.
So what I want to say is scientists are very prone to getting up and talking to their scientific colleagues about all the detailed mechanistic understanding of how something works. And a group like XQ will want to know that eventually. But what you need to sell any venture capitalist is the benefits of what you've got. They're not necessarily firstly interested in the detail of how it happens. They want to know that when that happens, how am I going to make money? So when that happens, what's the benefit for those people that XQ keeps saying are out there waiting for the products? Sell the benefit. And it's very hard for scientists to do that because they're not trained to. So if you need assistance to know how to pitch in a way that the audience will be wanting to hear it, just come and seek advice. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is go do it. Know your audience. Like XQ will want more of that detail, but some other venture capitalists will just want you to sell them the benefits, and they'll figure out, they've got a team of scientists who'll go and crawl all over it and do their due diligence around the science and how it works. They want you to sell the idea, and then they'll go and look at it.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to be, you know, more than less salesy for sure. Right? Everything in life is about selling and persuasion, but obviously, you know, yeah, at least for most of folks like us, bring your data, right? That speaks a lot, right?
Definitely.
In God we trust, all others bring data.
Raymond, do you have any last words on that? To add to that?
I would just say that, I mean, it's basically building engagement, right? Communicating and then building engagement. You need to be able to like engage with various parties and get them like interested, right? I think that's kind of like the bottom line, right? Yeah.
That's right. And if you do that first with the grabbing the engaging and the grabbing the interest, then there'll be follow-up meetings. You don't have to do it all in one 5-minute pitch.
Yeah.
It's about building relationships, right? I mean, obviously
exactly.
VC are usually busy. So, you know, when you come, then bring some data and, you know, not just a chit chat, you know, like everybody's quite busy, right? So we do it as a profession, you know, right? We have to look at a lot of stuff, and then we find the one that kind of ticks the boxes. Yeah. But again, reaching out early doesn't hurt.
Yeah. And generally, and I will also say that, I mean, like if you're like talking to the right people, then it will feel right. Yeah. Meaning that generally the people who are interested would be interested, and it just works that way, right?
Yeah, so and if like, not, then just be thick-skinned and move on, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
right?
Doesn't you know, just have to be thick-skinned and move on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Raymond. And you mentioned this word, or somebody did earlier in our discussion, and I think it's a really important word. So I want to say it again: alignment. If the venture is going to succeed, all the people in it have to be absolutely clearly aligned in what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Aligned in the first instance, aligned in their ongoing intentions, aligned in how they're going to do what they're going to do. If you've got squabbling amongst the initial team, it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that needs a lot of good communication.
I mean, I will also like say, right, like my last point would be basically saying that, you know, I came in with the idea that investors will be interested in sort of like pulling the science apart, right? Sort of like discrediting your science and things like that. But it's actually not true, right? So you want to find investors who will believe in you and sort of like go on this journey with you, right? It's not just like giving you like $10 million, go do your thing, right? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, right? I think a lot of a mentality, at least initially when I was doing this, I kind of had a little bit of this kind of thing, right? But it's not, right? So it's basically committing and saying that we are going to do this together, right? I'm going, and then, and providing whatever is required to go on this journey together, right? I think that would be the way I saw like frame it, right?
Yeah, that's very well said.
Yeah, thanks, Raymond. Yeah.
On that note, I think that makes a very good end to this panel discussion. And I mean, thanks so much to all the over 100 participants that are still with us right now. So again, Raymond, XQ, Cheryl, thank you so much for your time and being part of this panel discussion. And I mean, we could, you know, go on talking. And yeah, and we're happy to tell everyone again that we do have our next webinar on 21st October. You can sign up to the BCS mailing list, or Duke-NUS will also send out information on the next webinar. So watch out for that. And thank you to all participants, panelists, and I wish all of you a great day.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks, Natasha, for moderating.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Natasha.
pleasure.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you, everyone.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Pleasure.